Out of all sectors of food animal production, the dairy industry is perhaps the most innovative and technologically advanced. This being said, even milk production isn't free of criticism concerning animal welfare. Today I'm chatting with Dr. Derek Haley, an associate professor from the Ontario Veterinary College Department of Population Medicine. Dr. Haley leads research concerning the behavior and welfare of dairy and beef cattle. He mentors graduate students, trains future veterinarians, and his research has been cited by other authors nearly 3,000 times. Dr. Haley, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Well, thank you for your interest. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
So, how would you describe the overarching goal of your research in just one sentence?
Well, I'm really interested in understanding how animals perceive and experience the world around them. And that includes things like understanding how livestock and cattle in particular feel about the way that we care for them and the way that we manage them.
Absolutely, great answer. So, for those listeners who don't know, the Canadian dairy industry is very different from the United States. We have a supply management system, and that allows smaller family operated farms to remain profitable. When it comes to farm size and animal welfare, do you think smaller is better? Like, would you say the Canadian approach is leads to animals having happier lives?
Well, Jacob, I think we can kind of address that in a couple of different ways. And first, let's start on the topic of farm size, because I think our natural inclination is that a farm that's really big can't have good animal welfare or is perhaps more at risk of having welfare problems. But an example that I can think of, when I finished my undergraduate degree, I knew somebody from the US who completed a degree in dairy science, and they went off to work at a farm. And their entire job was looking after it was a huge farm, thousands of cows, and their entire job was to look after the cows that were calving. They were
Mhm.
entirely specialized, and that was all they had to do. They
Right.
didn't have to worry about milk production or mastitis problems or reproductive problems. They just had to look after cows that were giving birth and their babies. And so there's an example where a large farm could potentially have even better welfare by having and hiring people who are very specialized in particular areas rather than having one farmer who has to do everything in addition to knowing everything about the crops and these sorts of things. So I know our natural tendency is to shy away from big farms and big anything, big Walmart, big everything. But there are some potential advantages there. And I think, but really what it comes down to is that people make the difference. If you don't have the right person in that job, whether it's looking after calving or whether it's a dairy farmer who's looking after a whole variety of aspects of running their operation, then animal welfare is really going to be a problem. So that's kind of the farm size element of it, I think. With respect to supply management, I think we've really got a good situation here in Canada when it comes to that system and its potential benefits for animal welfare. And I think that primarily has to do with the stability of pricing and the predictability of income for dairy farmers. Um, you know, in a system where producers are not sure how much return they're going to get for their milk, they can't necessarily afford to invest money in improving housing facilities until it's absolutely necessary, or to upgrading the milking system until it's absolutely necessary. And I think we have a little bit of a luxury with that in Canada. Given our supply management, producers may be able to forecast and upgrade their facilities and in build new stalls or new barns and upgrade things because of the predictability of their income.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not particularly familiar with the European dairy industry. I don't know if they have supply management system or not, but do you think widening our focus, there's anything that Canada could maybe learn from other areas, potentially Europe?
Well, I think what comes to mind when I think of Europe is kind of the level of legislation that's in place to protect animal welfare. And my sense is sometimes in talking to in teaching and interacting students with undergraduate students is they feel like, if we had more legislation, if we just made it illegal to do this, or if we required farmers to do this or that it would be better. I think in the North American context, we're a little bit more averse to legislative oversight and control. The other thing is that I think about kind of a more legislated approach. One of the problems with that is it's only good if it's being enforced. And
Yeah,
so there are certain aspects of animal welfare legislation that we have that I think, well, before we change that, it would be interesting to see how animal welfare is if the legislation, the way it was being enforced.
absolutely. Yeah. So the scientific discussion of animal welfare usually considers three components: biological functioning, natural living, and positive affective states or moods. So considering the present state of the average dairy farm in Canada or in North America, do you think we've tackled, the basic biological functioning to the point where we're ready to consider promoting natural living and the positive affective states?
Yeah, well, I think absolutely. I think that our focus, and I think myself working in a veterinary college and teaching the vets of tomorrow, there has been so much focus on health and diseases and best medicine, uh, that it's led us to this place where we've just naturally had to consider more. The idea that the animals that we farm are sentient, that they can suffer, that they can experience something akin to pleasure, is really an important driving force now in food, in livestock production. An example I'll use is, I think of dehorning dairy calves. The veterinarian and the farmer together have come up with methods to do that, to ensure that there's no infection, and to ensure that it's done quickly and we can control the bleeding and all these sorts of kind of medical technical things related to animal health. But for a long time, we didn't do anything about the fact that it was a painful procedure, that it is a painful procedure. Now we recognize that and we do something about that. We have the ability and the drugs to be able to mitigate pain, both short-term and long-term, when it comes to a procedure like dehorning. And I think that world is really opening up, the moving on beyond the biological functioning. We understand that affective states and biological functioning, there's overlap there. When
Right. Yeah.
animals are sick, they experience malaise.
Yeah.
And so we see them, rather than two separate entities, we see the overlap between those two areas, and we're trying to increasingly now understand what it feels like for a cow to be sick with mastitis versus lameness versus a twisted stomach. What do those different conditions feel like for the animal, and how can we mitigate those negative feelings to hopefully allow the animal to recuperate even faster?
I see. So, continuing kind of along that vein of moving beyond biological functioning, I know from your publications that social bonds among cattle are an area of interest to you. So, in your opinion, are there realistic improvements to be made on dairy farms that could allow for more natural social interactions among the animals?
Well, I think first I have to say that I come at all of these topics that I'm interested in, I come at them as a scientist, and so I'm a natural skeptic.
Mm,
I don't come in thinking cows are just like people. They have friends, they have best friends.
right.
I come at it from the perspective of, what is the evidence that animals have preferred associations? How important is it to them to interact with specific individuals and be able to avoid others? So I come at it, from a fairly, as a healthy skeptic, a scientist who's open to being convinced by the evidence. And I would say, what we know about social behavior of cattle in their progenitors, their wild progenitors, I I don't think their life socially is that bad overall. I mean, they lack control over the fact that they may get regrouped several times, depending on the stage of lactation or their level of milk production. On larger farms, they may be moved into different groups. And so if they have these preferred associations, those bonds may be kind of disrupted by doing that. So, but there are little things like that. I think probably the biggest one with respect to social bonds where we have an opportunity to further explore has to do with cow-calf separation and the maternal offspring bond that happens there, which is obviously in conventional practice disrupted by removing the calf at a very young age. And that's a fascinating topic, just trying to understand what is a bond, what is a social bond, what is a maternal bond, how different is that in non-human animals, in cattle, compared to what we experience as humans.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like a fascinating topic. So obviously, I mean, frequently I feel like producers aren't considered when people talk about making changes, perhaps to practices like you're talking about calf separation and other things to promote animal welfare. But you come from a rural area, you're not out of touch with the nitty gritty of food production. And although your research could be seen as a force for change in the dairy and other industries, would I be right to assume that your background makes you aware and empathetic towards the concerns of producers?
Absolutely. I mean, what a tough situation for them to be in. I mean, we all suffer from the human condition of, taking criticism in a pretty harsh way. I mean, if I think about it personally, I think, I teach 240 DVM students a year, and we get our teaching evaluations, and there's something that this is a great course and a great teacher, and then there's a whole bunch in the middle, and there's a couple over on the end that say this person, is disconnected or not a great teacher, and you focus completely on the criticism. And I think about farmers, and I think about the fact that they can face criticism in a variety of different forums, whether it's in social media or through news outlets looking for a sensational story. And they haven't been subjected to that for a long time. I mean, producing food for people is quite a noble endeavor. I mean, we need that food to stay alive. And here a farmer is trying to do that. And they're trying to do what's right, and they're also trying to do what's profitable, because like veterinarians and professors, farmers want to earn a good living. They want to feed their family. They want to buy their children nice gifts at their birthday. They want to save for their retirement. And suddenly they're faced against this barrage of, well, you shouldn't do it this way, you should do it that way. I think really we've had a disconnect between the way food is produced and the consuming public. In agriculture, I think we've thought for a long time, all they want is cheap food. And that's true, but now suddenly it seems, in addition to cheap, they would also, I mean, all of us, would also like it produced in an ethical manner, in an animal welfare friendly manner. And suddenly it's like, how do you accommodate that in this system? So I really feel for farm families having spent so much time trying to get their enterprise in a place where it's profitable and where they're doing the best job that they can from their perspective for the animals, and suddenly being told, no, actually, we don't want it that way. We want it a different way. It's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, I'm sure. I kind
But I
of
think,
love, go
can I
ahead.
just say, I think there's opportunity there on behalf of the industry, for opening up and having more conversation, understanding consumers' needs, desires, what they're interested in, and finding, some middle ground there. Not necessarily just doing everything that the consumer says, but finding ways to do it where the food can be produced in a profitable way, but also in a humane and ethical way.
Yeah. I kind of love to ask this next question to everybody I talk to, kind of in different ways. But you talked about the disconnect between producers and consumers. You talked about potentially a middle ground. Is there anything else you would throw out along those lines? It could be hypothetical, it could seem fantastical, but ideas in terms of public education to create a society that's more aware of their food and how it's produced.
Well, I'm not sure it's the best strategy, but I bet you if we paid more for our food, we'd care more about it.
Mm,
We wouldn't have been disconnected. You would have been forced to think like, why am I paying this much for that product and a little bit less for this product? Oh, it came from somewhere else or was produced in a different way. And I think again, we've had that luxury of, so much abundant, nutritious, affordable food that people haven't had to think about it.
mm,
And yeah, I think that if people, if the learner has to want to learn.
yeah,
And I think if there was again, I'm not saying, well, what we need to do is we need to put food prices right up to the closer to the ceiling. But if there were increases in food, that would motivate consumers to want to know more. And so all of the stuff about how many miles is it? 100 miles, 100-mile diet. How many kilometers is that?
something like that.
Yeah, all of these things, and plant-based options. I like that because it engages people in where their food comes from and what they're putting in their body. Whereas again, just for so long, we've had that luxury of, it doesn't matter, it's cheap, or you could just buy what you want. If you didn't like it, don't eat it. I love people taking responsibility for what they're eating, where it comes from, how it was produced. Um, so I guess to me, the big question is really, how do you motivate those people to want to learn?
Absolutely.
An undergraduate class that you take because it's a required course versus an undergraduate class that you take that's an option that you say, I want to take that class. It's a different
Absolutely.
world.
Speaking in my terms.
So I don't know how much people want to learn about food and where it comes from. I do have a feeling like that's increasing, and I think that's a good thing. Um, but I feel like that's key to educating them, is to finding the people that really want to learn about where it comes from and how it was made.
Absolutely. Dr. Haley, thank you so much. I think we'll leave it there. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time to speak with me today. I really enjoyed this.
You're welcome, Jacob. Thanks for your interest.